Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the September 21st, 2022 Diversion Authority Finance Committee meeting. We'll begin with the call of order. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Here.
Dr. Mahoney. Here. Mr. Peterson.
I'm here.
Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
Ms. Gayhart. Here. Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Redlinger.
Here.
Mr. Steen.
Here.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Here.
Mayor Carlson.
Here.
Mr. Reeds. Ms. Madriga. Quorum is present.
Thank you, Don. Next order of business is to approve the minutes of August 24th, 2022. They are attached in the packet and is on page 3.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of August 24th, 2022. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Item number 3 is the approval of the agenda. Again, it is in your packet.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 4 is the approval of the bills. We'll call on Ms. Terry Gayhart for that information.
Okay, total bills received through September 14th of 2022 is almost 8.9 million. Largest of which is Cass County Joint Water Resource District for 5.2, City of Fargo for 2.9, Clay County for $500,000. Those are the majority of the large bills.
Are there any questions for Ms. Gayhart?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner, seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the bills as presented by Ms. Gayhart today. Is there any discussion? Any questions? Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Ms. Gayhart.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Next order of business is item number 5 is the finance report. Again, we call on Ms. Gayhart for that information.
On the report, we have $139 million, almost $140 million in total assets. Your liabilities are at 2.4, consisting mostly of vouchers payable at 2.2. So your net position is $137,400,000.
Any questions? Are there any questions? Entertain a motion, please.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner. Been moved and seconded to approve the finance report as presented by Ms. Gayhart, page 26 of the Finance Committee packet. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 6 on the agenda is the Executive Director's Financial Report. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll start out with the monthly revenues. You can see the middle column here is sales tax revenue coming in from Fargo at 3.1 million. Cass County sales tax 1.7, and then we had a reimbursement through State Water Commission funds for 3.5 for a total of 8.7 million in revenue this month.
Joel, can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely.
So obviously, we're hoping that we have some other participation, but I'm looking, so at the state of Minnesota, I see 0. And are we hoping that eventually Clay County and Moorhead, obviously there's all zeros, are we eventually, are they going to participate, and how, do you have a feel for how that's going to go?
Yeah, great question, Commissioner Pepcorn. So the Minnesota entities have committed through the JPA to request up to 86 million from Minnesota state funding. So far, we're still needing about 43 million in requests from the state of Minnesota. So the previous 43 million doesn't show up on our ledger, but it was received by the city of Moorhead and Clay County and used for flood control projects within the community. So we don't track at the authority state of Minnesota funding because it doesn't come into our organization. It goes into the city of Moorhead or Clay County.
But I just want to clarify, they've done flood control projects, which is great, but as of now, they are not participating in any financial way in the diversion. Is that correct?
Well, it gets a little bit complex. I don't think we could go so far as to say those funds are not required for the comprehensive project. We do consider the in-town levies as part of the comprehensive project. Traditionally, the city of Fargo has done their own in-town work, but we do reimburse the city of Fargo utilizing the flood sales tax. The city of Moorhead has always done their own flood control, utilizing their own funds and state funds, and we have not tracked any of that, so we don't have that in our financial plan. It's kind of outside the financial plan.
But, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind me
Please,
following.
continue.
But my question is, and obviously it's because the funding systems are just different in Minnesota, that's part of it. But technically, they are not participating in the diversion funding that we look at right now, correct?
They are not participating in a direct way with the authority, so it's all indirect. But I think maybe to look at it from a comprehensive standpoint, we need the Minnesota entities to complete their in-town flood protection as part of the comprehensive project, just like we need Fargo to complete that.
So just one more and then I'll stop
Please.
talking. But the key thing is, obviously, we would love to have Minnesota participate in the actual funding of the diversion. And so and I know it's much more complicated because of the legislature, but we are working on that, hopefully, and hopefully they will participate at some point, correct? Would that be a good way to phrase it?
Yeah, so they'll never participate directly to the authority. So we'll never show on our financial plan a contribution from the Minnesota entities. So a direct contribution from the Minnesota State Legislature won't ever occur. Those funds would go to a Minnesota member entity and then be utilized, whether it's MCC JPA or City of Moorhead internal flood control. So that's how the Minnesota entities will participate. I mean, we could work with the Minnesota entities, but then we start mixing indirect dollars with direct dollars, and it starts to get even more confusing. But,
Mr. Chair, this is Rick Steen. Need a chance.
Commissioner Peterson is on deck.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joel, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but they can't invest directly in this project because of the legislature. They're not allowed to allocate state resources out of their legal boundaries. So, and again, maybe I'm oversimplifying this for the sake of maybe my not understanding, but don't they have to do it the way they're doing it because they can't invest in North Dakota? And if we commingle the dollars, the state legislature will say, well, you're obviously taking money and investing it in Fargo or in West Fargo or in the rural areas of Cass. Isn't that why this is being done this way? And if I'm wrong, so be it. I see Mr. Shockley up, but I don't think they can legally invest in our project.
yeah, I'd probably defer to General Counsel Shockley's judgment on that.
Mr. Shockley's prepared.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll briefly touch upon that question and then maybe just an overall brief outline of how the Minnesota funding works versus the North Dakota funding. So you're correct, Minnesota funding under their bond, every couple of years, the state of Minnesota issues a bond. And those dollars can only be used in Minnesota on the Minnesota side. And we've utilized Minnesota entities as the recipient for those sources, and they can only be spent in Minnesota. So to backtrack about the Minnesota contribution, I would take a slightly more aggressive stance and say they have in fact contributed to the comprehensive project, and here's why. In order to make the comprehensive project function, you need to flow 37 feet through town. Without that flow through town, the project does not work. The city of Moorhead has completed, estimated, and I'm using rough numbers, about $150 million of in-town work. Of that $150 million of in-town work, the state of Minnesota has contributed plus or minus about $120 to $130 million, with the remainder of the $20 million being paid for by the residents of Moorhead through special assessments. This is very similar to Fargo, how Fargo has completed its in-town flood protection, which is absolutely critical for the comprehensive project. The difference is how we track those dollars. We have tracked the dollars for the Fargo flood protection by showing it as an input from the sales tax and a deduct for the Fargo projects. So in the initial financial plan that we came up with a number of years ago, we had a choice. We could either try to lump all of that together that had previously occurred, or we could just have Moorhead kind of sit on it, sit indirectly out there. And we made that choice. And there was $86 million that we had allocated to Minnesota. Of that, there was approximately $43 million of estimated remaining in-town flood works to be completed. That number has went down because the cost to complete has been less. Moorhead has been successful in getting the majority, if not all of that remaining $43 million, which just leaves $43 million that we are working with Clay County to request for additional improvements outside of the city of Moorhead, which will include potential costs associated with some of the mitigation, some of the roads. And because of the way the funding works in Minnesota, we're putting together, Paul and I have been working, putting together a schedule of when to make those requests, because Minnesota wants a very specific, here's what we're going to use the money for, and allocate it as part of the bonding project. So it's a complex answer to a complex question. So I would say that they have in fact put money into the comprehensive project, because if they didn't put the in-town work in, there's no way the comprehensive project would work, because it's designed for 37 feet through town. If we would have went with the 35 foot through town, we probably wouldn't have needed as much of the improvements, because then you're not building up. But because of the challenges associated with 37 feet, we needed additional in-town flood protection to make the comprehensive project work. So hopefully that answers the question.
So, Mr.
And
Chair,
Chair
just real quick,
I'm on the phone too, and if I could be put on deck to be called on, that'd be great. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, just real quick, I apologize but this, and it's repetitive for a lot of people that have been on this for a long time, but sometimes it's good to repeat this, because not everybody has been watching this all the time. So like I said, it might be repetitive, but I think it's good to go through. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Pipcorn. Rick Steen, did you have something else, sir?
Yeah, just a question or a comment, perhaps. Some of the confusion with this perhaps just leads to how this is presented. If you go to page 54 of our level 1 summary, the overall status here in our binders, it talks about the North Dakota/Minnesota River Stage 37 projects, and it lists $25 million for the current year budget. And then you go to the next page of level 2 detail, and it talks about the Minnesota River Stage 37 projects, and there's 0. So perhaps the impression is, when you look at some of this, that the diversion, as we know it, the Metro Flood Diversion Authority is responsible for the Minnesota River Stage 37 projects when you're looking at page 54, but you get to page 55 of our packet, and that would indicate, well, we're really not, because Clay County does not does not show up there. So I'm just curious as to, in our presentation, should this really talk about the North Dakota/Minnesota River Stage projects if it's not being funded with diversion funds, but is being funded with Minnesota funds?
Thank you,
That
Commissioner
would be one
Steen.
for John.
Mr. Paulson?
Yeah, Commissioner Steen, that's a great question. So I believe the way we're doing it, and forgive me because Paul isn't here, so if I misspeak here, I'll correct it in the future. But until we get the Minnesota dollars, we are allocating diversion dollars to these projects because we need to have them budgeted. So if Minnesota dollars were to come for, say, Clay County River Stage 37 projects, the MCC JPA would take care of that with those Minnesota funds, and those would never hit the diversion books. And we would then show that, or remove those from our tracking of our budget right now. But for the time being, because those have not been secured, the remaining funding for Minnesota has not been secured, we still need to show how we are going to budget and do those projects utilizing diversion funding. So I would agree.
So if we would not capture the Minnesota funding, or if they were not successful in getting that, then that would be an additional cost to the diversion that we're not contemplating, because we're contemplating Minnesota's paying that.
No, so we are budgeting for those, Commissioner Steen. So that's why they're showing up in our monthly budgets. However, if and when we get additional Minnesota funding, we will use that for projects on the Minnesota side within the county. I don't think there's much city work remaining, but mainly we would focus on the River Stage 37 projects in Clay County, any property acquisitions in Clay County, and any odds and ends necessary for the southern embankment on the Minnesota side is where those funds would go.
So we are counting on the Minnesota funding, that 43 million or whatever it might be.
We have the 43 million contemplated as coming into the program in our financial plan. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was getting at.
Yep.
Mayor Mahoney?
I think Commissioner Pepcorn's right. It's kind of confusing to what money is in and what money isn't in. But I think the plan I like what Shakti just mentioned is, I know Kevin Campbell is working on the additional 43. And I think Dave, the diversion has asked for a plan of how we're going to do that out, just because you have to catch it when the Minnesota legislative body bonds. Mm-hmm. But I think, Dave, the history is, yes, we already have planned it. If it wasn't raised, it was in the financial plan, but we were expecting out of the conference with the two governors that Minnesota would pay $86 million, and that's been the intent all the way along. And I think when Charlie Carlson talks, she's very strong that they will honor that and bring that money to the table. So they put in 43 million of $86 million ask. They have another 43 million to go. But I'm glad, John Shockley, you guys are working on a plan of suggested times to which that money has gone in, because Dave and I will tell you the North Dakota legislative body will watch that very closely and just wants to make sure Minnesota pays.
Chair Dardis, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, please. Mayor Carlson?
Thank you. And I apologize, this new platform doesn't have a way to raise my hand, but I did want to concur with what Commissioner Peterson said, what Mr. Paulson said, and what Mr. Shockley said. And it also depends on what date that you're calculating the contributions from. Minnesota did start, and specifically Moorhead did start our intel and flood mitigation in 2010, but the joint powers was not signed until 2016. So I don't think it's appropriate for Moorhead to be penalized for kind of being ahead of the game and doing 6 years of flood work before we sign the joint powers. And if you start calculating the amount of funding that we did get from the state from 2010, it is close, it's quite significant, and significantly over the 86 million that is in the joint powers. We had the last component of inflow and flood mitigation. The last request was in our request this year, but as it's been noted, the state of Minnesota did not pass its either the bonding or the tax bill this year. There still is a very slim chance it could happen, but we are continuing to ask for those funds. So, it is up to our legislature. But we have done a significant amount of in-town flood mitigation already. The majority of it is done in the city of Moorhead. The remainder of it is outside of the city and is in Clay County.
Thank you, Mayor. Anything else on continue with your financial report, or Mr. Paulson?
I'll continue,
One
Mr.
more
Chair.
thing, Chair Gardner. I did want to add that is correct. The funding from the state of Minnesota cannot leave the boundaries of the state of Minnesota. And that is why it comes to the city and to the county versus going to the diversion. So I just wanted to make sure that was clarified and confirmed.
Thank you, Mayor Carlson.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will, I'll just move here to the level 2 status, and we'll just go through this real quick. Again, consistent with previous months, a majority of our expenditures this last month were in property acquisition. So you can see the maybe just follow the cost to date for this year in the 22 fiscal budget column, which would be the second column from the right. And just kind of go down there. You can see the River Stage 37 projects, which are a majority of the Fargo work that's being done this summer. And then again, you can see lands and impacted property mitigation at 29 million expended. And we're still expecting about another 20 million for the year for our property acquisition. Next page, please. And then here you'll see the third-party MOUs, which is another large area of our expenditures, and we're at a cost to date this year of 9.4 million. Next page, please. And then here's the remaining recap of our monthly balance. So cost to date this year, we're at about 64 million. Of our 120 or over our 194 million budget, bringing us to a remaining balance of 129 million, which again, as mentioned last meeting, we do not expect to get close to that budget amount for this year.
Does that concern you?
No, it doesn't, because the majority of the work is due to property acquisition delays and the slight delay that River Valley Alliance had getting started with their construction. So there was nothing that was contemplated to be expended this year that either expands or goes away. So it just gets moved basically into the 23 budget.
So any of the mitigation programs that the city of Fargo did you have any trouble getting contractors? I see that Nathan's back there. I mean, when you put out requests for bids, did you have contractors? Okay, not a problem. Okay, good. I was just, like I said, I continue to look at the remaining balance of some of these projects that aren't getting done, and are we headed to our perfect storm where all of a sudden we got to have this stuff done and there's not enough contractors or whatever to go around? Thank you.
For those of you that aren't here, Nathan nodded his head, so.
Mr. Chair, I actually am feeling more and more comfortable that we're moving in the right direction as far as schedule is concerned for the overall program. We wanted to see the P3 developer get stood up, and they're at that point now where they're actively in construction. And there isn't any critical path projects that I'm concerned about as far as meeting our 2027 substantial completion deadline. So at this point, I think we're moving forward. We have to keep in mind this is about a 5-year build, so if things don't happen right away here, we have plenty of time to address them. And most of the projects that we do have are really 1 to 2 year projects. So we have plenty of time to get these.
Mayor Mahoney.
Joel, I know you say 27, but in 27, we would have the capacity to defend a flood. When you say substantial completion, actually, the substantial could be completed in 26, and in 27 in the spring, we'd be able to defend a flood, as I understand.
Well, just to clarify, so substantial completion would be achieved in 27 and then final completion in 28. So yes, you're close. All right, we'll move to the last sheet. We'll show administration budget. Again, that's looking fine. Once again, for everyone's awareness, we had anticipated some additional positions this year at the start of the year that we're just filling right now. So we will be under budget on the administrative side as well. So with that, certainly entertain any questions that the Finance Committee might have.
Are there any questions from Mr. Paulson? Mayor Mahoney?
Joel, on this last slide, am I under the impression that the office expenses go away because you're going to be over with the Alliance? Or, I know you got a great rate from the city of Fargo, but does that change, or are your office expenses also going to be the incidentals that you have as an office? Printing, internet, all those things?
Yeah, we'll still have an office budget. It'll change a little bit at our new location, but we'll still need, we're purchasing furniture over there right now, office supplies, those sorts of things. Okay. So we'll always have that office line item budget. I would actually think it's going to be pretty similar to what you see this year. Fargo has been very generous in offering us a very fair price on the rent of the Civic Center. But the rent over at the new building isn't that far out of line as well. So,
Anything else for us?
that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Anybody have any questions regarding the financial report? All right, we'll move on to contracting actions. Mr. Paulson?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have just one contracting action for your consideration today. It's Task Order 4, Amendment 0 for Minn Kota Power Cooperative. And really, this is for a utility line relocate of a large transmission line over the southern embankment reach. So I don't know if there's any questions, but certainly could.
Move to approve.
Since for Mr. Paulson, we have a motion. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Peterson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the Minn Kota Task Order Amendment for $465,000 as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes?
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Ms. Gayhart. Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Item number 8 under other business is a DA board approval of a memorandum of understanding and agreement actions. We'll call on Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We only have one MURA, and that is for the southern embankment. We're slowly wrapping up the final MURAs and MOUs. There's just a few of outliers that are just taking a little bit longer than the other ones. So this involves the southern embankment and associated infrastructure. This is just for the relocation of different utilities within the southern embankment area. This really relates to fiber connections. The agreement is very similar to all the other MURAs in that as we need to relocate lines, we issue a task order that's agreed upon by the parties, and then MLGC goes ahead and relocates it. Very similar to all the other MURAs. Happy to answer any questions, but we're recommending approval.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Questions?
Move to approve.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the MOU and agreement actions as presented by Mr. Shockley for the MURA. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Ms. Gayhart. Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn,
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Item B under other business is a draft of the 2023 cash budget. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the first month we'll be reviewing the draft cash budget for 23. So I realize this is the first time we're going through and there might be some questions. What I would like to do for this meeting is just kind of step through this. The blue lines that you see are the kind of overall category summation. So I'll go through those and then I'll just talk about some of the larger items that are contained within those. But we're certainly going to spend as much time as the committee wants digging into these numbers. So I'll just start with the first one with the channel P3. So this is the funding for Jacobs, Ernst & Young, and Onstead Twitchell. So you can see we are anticipating about 8.9 million in legal and management fees for 2023. The next item is the milestone payments to the developer. We do anticipate to have to start making milestone payments in 23. So we do have 15 million anticipated in there. A majority of those are for utility relocates for the diversion channel that would be paid to the developer.
Mr. Chair,
Please,
how
Commissioner.
much coordination are you doing with our P3 developers regarding this budget? So when we have allocations of resources towards specific widgets, are they then validating, yep, we'll be able to accomplish those, trying to step in a timeline that corresponds with this budget?
Yeah, so they deliver to us a baseline schedule of when they plan on achieving certain billable units throughout the construction of the project. So we have a general idea of what buildable units will come due for milestone payments in any particular year. So because we're just getting started next year and buildable units aren't paid until they're completely finished, there's going to be a lot of buildable units being started on next summer, but not a whole lot being completed next year in 23. So yes, to answer your question, we do have a really good idea of when they plan on completing each buildable unit and those coming online, and then we'll budget those out in the cash budgets according to Red River Valley Alliance's schedule of completion.
Thank you.
So the next category would be other mitigation work. So here you can see we're really just funding the demolition package, which is at the bottom, the work package 50 phase 2 demo. And then the first item, the Oxbow Hicks and Bakke. And the Oxbow Hicks and Bakke is really for a wetland mitigation project that's ongoing within that community. So we got a small amount in there to finish up that project. The next category is the North Dakota and Minnesota River Stage 37 projects. So here you can see a majority of these are Fargo's in-town projects. Of that 19 million that we've plugged in for 23, approximately 9 million is carryover from this year, over from the 22 cash budget into the 23 cash budget. And then we have a small amount in there for some additional in-town levies as well. The next category, and our largest category, is the lands and impacted property mitigation. And you can see we've plugged in about 84 million for next year for property acquisition. And I won't go into all those line items, but you can see how we've divvied those out between our lands program management, which is the 7 million, and then the diversion channel and associated infrastructure at 10, and the southern embankment at around 19 million, and then a little bit of OHB work necessary still, and then the upstream staging area, which is a lion's share of that 84 million at 47 million. Most of that is for flowage easements, structure demolition, and the like. The next category is non-construction engineering. So that's, a lot of your engineering design work that's being done. Most of, or I think all of HMG's time is contained within this category. So you can see the engineering and design fees and how those have been broken out between the different categories. And then as you go down, you also will see the program management and legal financial. Again, this is going to be for Jacob's OT. For the overall project, the first category up there was just for the channel and the P3 portion of the project. So we have a couple different locations where we're tracking program management, legal, financial, and procurement. The next category is the DA construction contingency. This is where we're allocating our contingency funds. Of course, we're not anticipating on spending any of those in 23. So you see none of those allocated for either the 22 or the 23 cash budget. The next category is the third-party MOU mitigations. Another fairly decent sized category because we're doing most of that utility relocation work up front before we really get into the deep excavation work of the channel and then of the southern embankment, of course. Let's see here. And then the last remaining blue highlighted rows there are different things that we're tracking. So that 75 million there that you see, though that is current financing charges that we're anticipating for the whole program. We do anticipate a $6.3 million payment next year, and that's principally for the debt service on the large historic loans that we're carrying at the authority right now. You can see the P3 reserve fund that was set up this year. We don't anticipate touching that since it is a reserve fund. And then we have the WIFIA SRF draws. We don't anticipate on making those draws this year. And then the DA payments to the Corps of Engineers. Again, not anticipating to make any payments next year. And then we have the O&M, not anticipating making any payments there. And then some additional debt service of $864,000 for that temporary refunding bond that Cass Joint Board took out for us. So I know that's a lot of information. We were able to take thousands of lines of data and get it into one table. So we did our best to simplify this. But any one of these, we can certainly drill down and dig in. So if there's any questions while you're reviewing this, if there's any questions today, we certainly could entertain those at this time.
And I will remind the Finance Committee that this is for information only today. The action of approving the budget will be next month. Are there any questions for Mr. Paulson? Any questions from anyone? All right, we'll move on then. Item C is a recommendation to accept a bid and award it. It's on page 108 of your packet. Chris is at the podium. That's Chris's one. Thank you, Chris.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. As a part of our ongoing land management process, we did have about 10 properties that were prepared to remove from the staging area and or our construction footprint. So we issued bids for property demolition contract, and those bids came in last week. We received 3 bids on the project. The engineer's estimate was about $840,000. As you can see, 2 of those bids were slightly higher than our estimate. One was slightly lower. So we're recommending today that we award the project to Schmidt & Sons Construction in the amount of $794,000 and $794.312. Sorry, I'm not saying that right, but so. I can answer any questions, but it's a ongoing standard process we go through for home demolition and site restoration on the project footprint and the staging area.
Mayor Mahoney.
Move to approve, but I'd like Chad to go through that, see how there's a gap of 2.3 million to 700. I'm just really wow, engineering was close to what it was, but why are those others so high?
So I will second, and that's why my finger was up, Mayor. Same thing, and I know the answer to this, but I want you to answer. When we have a disparity of such a degree, there's always an explanation that needs to be had, because the public at large doesn't know why that would be if they look at this cold.
Yep.
So I know the answer. Do you know the answer?
Absolutely. The first bidder we received is an out-of-town bidder, never bid on these types of projects before. We're probing to look for an opportunity to be here. So I just don't know that they maybe fully understood the scope of work or what the pricing should be. Looking down their bids, they were consistently 2 to 3 times higher on all their items than the local contractors were. So I think it was just a matter of a non-local contractor that was looking for an opportunity and just really probably wasn't in the playing field. The other two have been two ongoing.
Gordon does do good work. It's not.
I'm not advocating they don't do good work, but I just don't know that they understood the scope or were really super interested in the project. So they put a bid in to see where they landed, and they were off the mark here. So, but IB and Schmidt and Sons have bid several of our projects, and both have turned in what I would consider competitive bids based on our estimates. So.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion? Commissioner Pipcorn.
Just a real quick comment. So the thing that's great is this is a local company doing the work. And so that's, some people were under the impression that a lot of the work was going to get done from outside company. And so I think that's good. And this is maybe to go along with that. So obviously we have this big company, but I think if there's any way we can track to see how much is done by local companies of the whole and I know that's a little bit overwhelming, but to kind of keep track of how much is, obviously the majority of it is going to stay within our area, our region. And so it's a good story to tell. So if that's possible, I think that'd be awesome. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, absolutely. Commissioner Pepcorn, we are starting to see more and more visibility of what especially on the P3 side, what their subcontractors are. Anticipate there will be limited use of subs this fall just due to the contracting and scheduling, but gearing up for a much heavier use of local subs next year, and we certainly will have more visibility of that as we get more and more pieces of the project under construction. So.
I think the other good news story on this chat is Schmidt and Brothers typically, or Sons typically recycle the houses. So in previous bidding, they've always come in lower because they seem to sell the houses to somebody else. The other companies come in and just destroy the houses. So it is a good story.
Yeah, that's correct. They were moving 3 homes today, all in today. They were moving 3 homes off of a existing contract and repurposing them. So that's absolutely right, Mayor.
And it's been clarified on these contracts that when they bid on these, that there's no winterization of somebody else's pointing fingers at each other?
Absolutely,
That's
Mayor.
clarified from last season?
Absolutely. We updated the bid forms to make that more clear and also made that more clear in our specifications as well. So absolutely.
Okay. Again, any more discussion? If not, Don, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Darvich.
Yes?
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Ms. Gayhart. Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
That is everyone.
That concludes the agenda for the Finance Committee today. Staff, you have anything else additional, non-agenda items you want to bring forward? Anybody from the Finance Committee have anything that you'd like to bring forward? With that, our next meeting is going to be October 26th, and I'm assuming we're going to go return to the old time at 4 o'clock. And with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
It's free from gluten, dairy, and soy. And Liquid IV is on a mission to change the world. For every purchase, they donate a serving to someone in need. And to date, Liquid IV has donated over 24 million servings globally. So it's just a little packet that you pour in your water, you stir it up, and you have a much, much better glass of water. It hydrates you better and it tastes better. Grab your Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco or get 15% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code FFT at checkout. 15% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code FFT at liquidiv.com. Back to waivers. Wide receivers, Dave, who are the best ones to get? I guess I'll ask you other than Garrett Wilson and Curtis Samuel.
Yeah, G. Wilson's going to be pretty good. I like him a lot. Samuel's going to be great short term. Sterling Shepard is available in half of CBS Sports leagues. I think he's a good long-term receiver that could at least live on your bench. Gallup is worth carrying for the long term. Jacoby Myers in PPR leagues. How about Corey Davis? He's had 2 good games to start the season. This Jets offense has put the ball in the air a lot, and he's still available in over 80% of our leagues. If you're looking for somebody just for week 3, it looks like Rashad Perriman, Russell Gage could be those dudes. Other short-term options include Josh Palmer, Noah Brown, Greg Dortch, Nelson Aguilar, and Patriots taking on the Ravens. Ravens were struggling against the deep ball last week. Aguilar's fast. And if I may give 3 more names, I know you didn't ask for this many, but talking about rookie stashes, Christian Watson, available in 2/3 of leagues. Sky Moore is still rostered in over 50% of leagues. And I'm not going to say it's a mistake to drop him because he's doing nothing, but he's going to come around eventually. And are we 2 weeks away from Jameson Williams joining the party in Motown? He's being held in about a quarter of CBS Sports leagues. Maybe you should see if he's on your waiver wire, and especially if you've got an IR spot that needs some warming up.
Okay. By the way, the Jets lead the NFL in pass attempts. We're talking about Garrett Wilson and Corey Davis, for that matter. 104 passes. Number 2 is the Bengals, who played a full overtime game, basically. They have 89. Tied for 3rd, Washington and Arizona. But the Jets have 15 more pass attempts than anyone else. Also, Garrett Wilson leads the NFL in red zone and green zone targets. Red zone inside the 20 or 20 yards and in. Green zone is inside the 10-yard line.
I've heard the green zone referred to as the score zone.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, fine.
You like that better?
I like the green zone, but score zone, we can roll with that.
People know what that is.
I just told them.
Yeah, so just
but people are going to know what the score zone is?
No, I don't think so either. So just say it inside the 10.
I often do. Tight end. Jamie, tight end ads?
Logan Thomas is the one you want to look at. Again, if you can find Gerald Everett or Tyler Higbee on waivers, and certainly in 10-team leagues, they're worth starting this week. And they would be the 2 best ones over Logan Thomas. But Thomas would be one. I don't love the matchup for Evan Ingram, but you got to like his involvement. So going to struggle probably in week 3, but should be okay moving forward if he continues to see A+ targets from Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson's offense. And he's only got 1 drop so far in the season, so that's a good sign for him. The third one would be, I don't want to buy back into Mike Gesicki yet, but it was a game where 2 or 3 50 times. The one thing that is something to discover with him is he's starting to get more comfortable in the offense. Is he starting to feel a little bit more confident in his role, and they feel a little bit more comfortable with him because he went from 1 target to 4. Again, pass attempts were certainly up for Tua, going from whatever he had in week 1 to 15 week 2. But they need a third option, and I don't know if Ced Wilson's going to cut it. Obviously, Chase Edmonds not doing the job in the passing game, so maybe Gesicki has a little bit of a bigger role. Again, if Milano plays, tough matchup against the Bills, but somebody you might want to keep an eye on.
Okay. By the way, Dan G says Beavis would call it the score zone. That's pretty funny. Yeah. Score. Yeah. Nice. DSTs. Dave, you got any DSTs?
I do have some DSTs. Check to see if the Saints and the Chargers are available. They're widely rostered, so double check on that. If Pittman's not back, the Chiefs DST is going to be awesome. They're available in a ton of leagues. If you don't believe in Daniel Jones and the 2-0 Giants, you can go with the Cowboys. Their defense has been pretty good. They're rostered in 59% of leagues. The Titans get the Raiders. There should be some turnovers there. They're available in 80% of leagues. Also, wait a minute. The Eagles are 29% rostered.
Really?
Which is crazy. They are a really good defense. I know they've got the Commanders this week. I think they make them humble. I think the Eagles DST is worth getting. So take everything I said, put the Eagles at the top. Eagles, Chiefs for now, then Cowboys.
What if the Chargers are available?
I think I'd probably take the Eagles over the Chargers.
Let me give you
Excited about the Eagles.
the Chargers have I just love their upcoming schedule: Jacksonville, Houston, Cleveland. So if you just want to sort of set it and forget it with the Chargers, Jacksonville, Houston, Cleveland. I actually don't know that Jacksonville's a good matchup. That's.
I think it might be good for
debatable.
them.
It just frustrated the Chiefs offense. I mean, they're going to frustrate the hell out of the Jaguars.
Right. I think it's a good matchup for the Chargers.
Okay. And
Lawrence isn't making my top 12 this week. The offensive line's still a problem.
Okay. And
Do you need IDPs?
IDP. Oh, kickers first, Jamie. Go ahead, kickers.
The kickers would be Robbie Gould, Will Lutz, and if Harrison Butker's still out, Matt Amendola.
IDP.
I would start with Nate. Don't call me Calvin and Hobbs. Slot corner for Las Vegas. He's given you at least 10 points each of the first 2 weeks of the season. Derek Forrest with Washington. I'm not sure what his role will be with Cameron Curl coming back, but you can look at him. Ernest Jones, linebacker for the Rams. Frankie Louvu, linebacker for Carolina. And I'm trying to find a defensive lineman. Let's go with Rasheem Green of the Texans, although I'm not loving him. He's the highest rated guy from last week, at least. Oh, wait a minute. Scratch that. Deron Payne, Commanders. For at least 2 more weeks, he should be good to go.
And we talked about some guys last week that are still available. Marcus Williams for Baltimore is having a massive year, but even without the 3 interceptions, he's doing great with tackles. Marcus Williams for Baltimore. New Orleans linebacker Pete Werner. And Houston defensive back Jonathan Owens is someone I added. He plays a lot, gets a lot of tackles. I didn't check the snap count for him this week.
Hold on. Let me check the rostership for Talanoa Hufanga.
Oh, yeah.
24%.
He's bad.
Great. I'd go get TH.
Okay. I did want to, for deep leagues, I am pretty intrigued by Noah Brown. I don't know how you guys feel about it. He's a slot receiver. He's played 45% of his snaps from the slot for the Cowboys, and he's big, 6'2". Yeah, not huge, and he's running downfield. He's a slot receiver he's running deeper routes than CeeDee Lamb. I know Michael Gallup is coming back, but they play different positions. So, Jamie, how do you feel about Dave? Whoever, how do you feel about Noah Brown, and who else in the deep leagues?
Yeah, Noah Brown certainly qualifies. Dave mentioned Brashad Perryman, but I think it's just kind of pick your poison with the Bucs at this point because Scott Miller led them in targets last week. They just added Cole Beasley. So I think that's more of a guessing game. But, yeah, I think Noah Brown, obviously Craig Dortch, he's had now 2 productive games without Rondell Moore on the field, so we don't know if Moore's coming back. Ashton Doolin led the team in targets last week, and if there is no Michael Pierce, he could be an option for you in deeper leagues. Dave mentioned Nelson Aguilar. I mentioned the column as well. Somebody who can have some opportunities as well against the Ravens if they're banged up. I think those are the best ones.
Who's your favorite?
Noah Brown. If there is no Gallup, just looking at this Giants secondary and the way Cooper Rush played last week, especially if no Dalton Schultz, there's a lot to like about where he can be right now.
That's
I think
right.
he's caught every target thrown his way.
I think the Schultz, and consider the Schultz impact. It's a good point. All right. So those are some guys for you to consider in your deeper leagues. Well, let's go to Buffalo 41 and Tennessee 7. Let's talk about the game from last night. A lot of injuries, unfortunately, and to some pretty important players. 4 starters on defense for Buffalo. We don't know. 3, actually. No, 4. And Mitch Morse, but he came back. They're starting center. And you know what? They gave up 7 points. So they did just fine. For Tennessee, Taylor Lewano left tackle.
Broken.
What's that? Tennessee, yeah.
Tennessee is broken.
They're in the Stone Age. They have, but if Traylon Burks gets dropped, I don't know that he will. 72% rostered. Pick him up, right? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. How do we feel about Derrick Henry? And by the way, the other Tennessee injury was Bud Dupree. He left in the second quarter, starting linebacker for them. How do we feel about Derrick Henry, Dave?
Did Taylor Lewan come back?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think he did. And if he did, he was out by the fourth quarter because they pulled all their guys.
I'll double check. But Derrick Henry, your thoughts on Henry? Let me just give the stats real quick. He had 13 carries, 25 yards, and a touchdown after 21 carries for 82 yards against the Giants.
It's bad. The first problem I see is that the offensive line is a humongous problem, way worse than I thought it would be. He's seeing 8 men in the box on almost 30% of his runs, fewer yards before contact than even Najee Harris, 0.12 yards before contact for Derrick Henry. I'd like to think that the Titans coaching staff is smart enough to figure out better ways to use him. And you saw it on a toss that they gave him After they were getting blown out, so they just gave him a toss and he gained some positive yardage on that play. But it feels like the burst is halfway out the door, if not totally out the door, and it makes me nervous. This feels like a telling week for the Titans because they've got the Raiders. I think it's their first easy matchup of the year. It's one that Derrick Henry should absolutely tornado through. But if
they had the Giants in week 1.
But the Giants' run defense with Leonard Williams is pretty good. And I do wish he averaged more than like 4 or 5 or 4.5 yards per carry in that game. But I'm willing to not panic yet on Derrick Henry. He's someone I'm trying to buy low on and not sell on. Not sell low for sure. I'm going to give him a chance against Las Vegas. And he still has a bunch of matchups against the AFC South to come. So a little worried. Like to see the Titans kind of change up how they use him and use him more on the edges. We'll see if they do.
Okay. Yeah, his yards per carry was way down in 2021. His explosiveness, his explosive play percentage, way down in 2021. And, I did the research. Every running back in NFL history who's had a 2,000-yard season, I think there are 8 of them. They've all lost at least a yard per carry the following year, and that happened to Derrick Henry. But a number of them bounced back the year after that, had a better season efficiency-wise. But it was, what did he play, 8 games last year? It was a year where he was just a volume guy. He really wasn't special as a running back. I know that sounds crazy, but if you just look at the explosive play percentage and just the yards per carry, he wasn't the same guy that we had seen the previous 2.5 seasons. So it is carrying over right now, but hopefully Henry can get things turned around. Jamie, do you think we'll ever get to a point where we can trust Devin Singletary as a starter? He had 8 touches a week after having 10 touches.
Not without an injury to one of the other 2 guys. I mean, they just feel pretty comfortable right now using all 3 of them. And so everything we heard this offseason, Zach Moss is not going away. He is not going away. And this is, you had to expect they were going to be a very pass-heavy team. And that's certainly playing itself out. But, Singletary, I think the minute he has a good game, and I'll say the same thing about Derrick Henry. He has a great game against the Raiders this week. I would be selling. If Devin Singletary has a good game at any point, you should be selling. Because it's not going to be sustainable probably for either guy at this point.
Wow, that's a strong statement on Derrick Henry.
Well, I mean, we just, Dave alluded to this, and Dave's been the high guy on Derrick Henry. This offensive line was always a concern for me. The passing game was always a concern for me. I didn't draft any of Derrick Henry. I didn't draft Derrick Henry in any of my leagues for a reason. He just made me nervous, for all the work that he had coming back from the injury. And it's played itself out. He should have had a good game against the Giants. He didn't. Last night, you had to expect a little bit of a down game just because the Bills' defense is fantastic, especially up front. If he does not have a good game against the Raiders, oh my God. But if he does, the name still carries plenty of recognition, and it should. And I'm not saying he's going to be bust if he doesn't have a good game against the Raiders. Or I should say, I'm not saying he's going to continue to be a bust, but he has that potential. But I do think, though, if he has a great game and you can get something fantastic in return for him, that's absolutely the move you should be making.
By the way,
It's
Dave.
the Raiders, Colts, Commanders, a bye, Colts, Texans. Those are the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Colts healthy might be tough.
The Colts are tough regardless. I mean, they've been good against the run, right? I mean, Jacksonville, Robinson. Yeah, Robinson had one big run, and otherwise they did great against him. And
You can find the end zone against those guys.
every time over the last 3 years that they've played without Shaquille Leonard, they've actually done pretty well against the run, and then they're even better with him. By the way, Derrick Henry, Dave, he actually faced an 8-man box on 36.5% of his carries last year. So it's nothing new for him, but I'm sure he did better
Right,
last
but it's
year.
with a worse offensive line this year. They've got to find some answers there.
All right, Philadelphia.
If Lawan's out, their best starting tackle is a rookie who was was Petit Frere round 3 or round 4 or later.
I'm not sure.
It was not a primary pick.
Two quick things. James Cook, if you're just looking at the box score, 10 of his carries came in the fourth quarter, hit 11 carries, and these two teams sat everybody in the fourth quarter. Basically, it was a preseason game. And what do you think about dropping Dawson Knox? He had a fine game, 4 for 41 on 5 targets. Drop him for Logan Thomas?
Yes.
Yeah.
Drop Dawson Knox for Mike Gesicki?
Not yet. But if
Who would you
Milano's
rather
out,
start this week?
if Milano's out, then he might be better than.
Yeah.
I'd rather start Knox. I don't want to start any tight end against the Bills.
I don't trust.
I mean, look, Mark Andrews just destroyed them, but he's Mark Andrews, so just take that into account.
The Dolphins, yeah. Neither of these teams should be a good matchup for tight ends. Dolphins, Bills. I am not calling Dolphins Bills game of the week. As much as I like the Dolphins, I do not think they are.
Yeah, great call by you.
That was a lot of fun. Philadelphia 24, Minnesota 7. Eagles just dominated. They had the ball for over 36 minutes. One thing that could have helped, Irv Smith had a big drop. Could have been a 63-yard touchdown. Darius Slay left with an injury in the fourth quarter, but he seems fine. There was really no mention of it that I saw after the game. Nothing serious there. All right, Jamie, big takeaways. Let's start. Why don't you give me the big takeaways for the Vikings?
Primetime Kirk Cousins again. It was ugly. He just couldn't avoid Darius Slay. They did a great job. The Eagles did of taking away Justin Jefferson and having a Slay basically on him and a safety over top and just getting Cousins frustrated. I wouldn't worry too much about the Vikings. I think they'll be fine. It was good to see Irv Smith get going. He should be mentioned in the tight end list. I got to add him to the column because what Kevin O'Connell told us, again, another squeaky wheel situation, that he was going to be more involved than he was. And so there's a lot to like about him potentially moving forward in this offense. But I think Dalvin will have a big bounce back game against the Lions. I think Justin Jefferson will be fine. Cousins will be fine. I wouldn't panic after what we saw last night.
Dave, your take on the Eagles. Oh, with Thielen.
Yeah, I was about to not talk about the Eagles and bring up Thielen because a lot of people were reaching out, freaking out over Adam Thielen. And finally, Kirk Cousins realized late in the game, maybe you should throw to Adam Thielen a little bit more. And he ended up being okay. I think that's the next guy that gets the squeaky wheel treatment in Minnesota. And it only makes sense that Philadelphia laid out a plan. This is a great way to take on Cousins and the Vikings. You put a safety over the top of Justin Jefferson. You dare Kirk Cousins to go elsewhere with the ball. And Cousins didn't do that. He kept throwing to him, but maybe he should start leaning on a great route runner like Adam Thielen and this tight end that they've got too. So I'm holding on to Thielen. If you cut him, you're a knucklehead, and you can't trade him for anything. And I think he's going to get more targets as we move forward, or at least as many as he had yesterday. Had 7 yesterday. I would imagine he'd catch more than 4 passes when he gets 7 targets.
Who would you rather have rest of season? Miles Sanders, who now has 30 carries in 2 games, or Adam Thielen?
Sanders.
I think Sanders makes sense as the answer. It's a lot tougher in full PPR. And you got to worry about Sanders not lasting all season long, but as long as he's here, man.
Because Thielen's the picture of health.
Yeah, right. That's a fair point.
I think Devontae Smith is going to be the team captain for the all-frustrating team. The guy who's going to be on your bench
I liked him this week,
when he's good. Yeah, but fantasy managers really didn't. He was started in 34% of leagues.
Yeah.
Which is better than Tyler Lockett, who was started in something like 18% of leagues and he had 100 yards. But I think it's going to be a head-scratcher with Devontae Smith.
He's a boom-bust flex to the core. We might even rename boom-bust flex after Devontae. I did too. I like him in week 3 against the Lions.
No, he did do well. I'm just saying,
or not against the Lions, against the Commanders.
You just never know. I don't know when to know it's going to be a Devontae Smith week. I figured after having no catches in week 1, they would try to make a point to get him involved.
Well, Sirianni said that.
First catch.
Yeah.
Yep.
They do have Washington next week, so that should be very good for everyone. Should be a high-scoring game. Well, I think the Eagles will hold up on their end. I don't know about Washington. All right, and yeah, I think what's really encouraging is how aggressive this team is. They are not a boring run team. It is Jalen Hurts' team, and he is crushing it. We will take a break. When we come back, the drop-o-meter, more names to know from the waiver wire. We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today.
The book is closed on the 2022 golf calendar, but that doesn't mean the news is stopping. Whether it's discussing the latest developments on the PGA Tour or chatting about LIV Golf's impact on the game, the First Cut has you covered. We're still active throughout the fall, previewing every single tournament and breaking down the news you need to know. Augusta will